This is The World This Weekend. Hello, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Coming up, international reaction to the U.S. veto of a UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza.
My fear is that Gaza could easily become a time bomb that really implodes regional stability.
Also on the program, some oil-producing countries push back against talk of phasing out fossil fuels at the COP28 Climate Summit.
We've never been closer to an agreement here on fossil fuels, so it's quite understandable that OPEC would panic.
And the groundbreaking way one Toronto hospital is reducing wait times for hip surgeries.
That was really fast. When I woke up in the recovery and they told me what time it was, I was amazed.
That's later, but first. In Tel Aviv, thousands of people rally, demanding the release of hostages being held in Gaza. It has now been more than 2 months since Palestinian militants kidnapped more than 240 people from southern Israel. This woman's son was taken.
Cannot stay home when people are dying in Gaza. Our people, the government of Israel must do something. Even ceasefire now, but bring them back.
The possibility of any kind of lasting ceasefire seems far off. Israeli troops are battling Hamas in North and South Gaza. And a day after the U.S. vetoed a ceasefire demand at the UN Security Council, the State Department has today announced the sale of thousands of munitions to Israel. Chris Reyes reports.
New images from southern Gaza shows a university flattened by an Israeli airstrike. The sound of soldiers cheering in the background. That as hospitals overflow with the wounded and the streets with the dead. Carl Scow with the World Food Program echoing the alarm that's been sounded by so many.
80% of the population, some 1.8 million people, have been displaced. Half of the population are starving. 9 out of 10 are not eating every day.
According to new analysis from the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, civilian casualties make up 61% of those killed in Gaza. Fawaz Gergis is a Lebanese-American professor at the London School of Economics. He says in his 40 years studying the Middle East, he's never seen the region so implosive.
There is so much hatred, there is so much rage, there is so much anger against both Israel and the United States. My fear is that Gaza could easily become a time bomb that really implodes regional stability.
On Friday, the United Nations Security Council tried to pass a resolution demanding a ceasefire, but failed when the U.S. used its veto power against it.
We are all Palestinians!
On the streets of New York, immediate demonstrations in support of Palestinians after the vote. Holly Horna is a retired interpreter.
And it makes me very ashamed that my government is doing this in my name.
Today, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu thanked the U.S. for its support. Israel will continue our just war to eliminate Hamas, he says. Adding to U.S. support, the Biden administration approving a $100 million emergency sale of tank ammunition to Israel, bypassing Congress. On the ground, Daniel Hagari, spokesperson for the Israel Defense Forces, making it clear his country is forging ahead with its mission.
We are in the intensive stage of the ground maneuvering. Our troops are operating in the hearts of Hamas's centers of gravity, in the northern and southern Gaza Strip simultaneously.
From Turkey's President Erdogan, harsh words for the U.S. A just world is actually possible, but not with America, he told the audience at a human rights conference in Turkey, adding that the Security Council must be reformed. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
In Doha, at a summit of Gulf states this week, the Emir of Qatar urges the international community to step in and force Israel to return to the negotiating table. Israel recalled its negotiators after a week-long truce with Hamas collapsed. Qatar played a key role in that truce and has acted as a mediator in several other Middle Eastern conflicts. To help us understand how this small country on the Persian Gulf became a power broker, I spoke to Reuters Qatar correspondent Andrew Mills. So, Andrew, how did Qatar come to play such a significant role in the negotiations between Israel and Hamas?
This is not a new role for Qatar. So since 2014 at least, Qatar has been, a team of Qatari negotiators have mediated every major conflict in Gaza. Qatar maintains an open line of communications to Israel and an open line of communications to Hamas. The Qatari negotiators have mediated everything from minor skirmishes in Gaza to full-blown conflicts over the last 9 or 10 years. So as I said, this is not something that's new.
What would be the benefit to Qatar to get involved in this, to become this facilitator between Hamas, Israel, and Western allies?
Qatar is a very small country. It's just a little bit larger than Prince Edward Island, surrounded by two very large neighbors, Saudi Arabia on one side and Iran on the other. And so one of the ways Qatar has kind of figured out how to maintain its own security is to maintain links to the West. So, for example, the largest U.S. military base in the Middle East is here in Qatar. But it provides also this function to Western powers. So it allows Western powers to have a line of communication via Qatar to adversaries like the Taliban and Hamas. So there's a Taliban political office here, and there's a Hamas political office here. By sort of being this almost back channel to Hamas, it provides a function to Washington and its major ally, Israel.
And there's no risk to Qatar in doing this?
Sure, there's huge reputational risk. And I think that was made very clear to the Qataris in the first days after October the 7th, when Qatar's emir went to Berlin and he was, welcomed by headlines calling him the Blood Emir. I mean, it's not popular in some corners for Qatar to maintain these links to a group like Hamas. But if you talk to the Qataris about it, they will say that this has been a really important function in this last, 2 months of conflict. We are the only people who are talking both to Israel and both to Hamas. And the way Qatar, I think, calculates it is that has a net benefit.
Mm-hmm. And how do the negotiations actually work? What do Qatar's negotiators actually do to attempt to reach an agreement between these two bitter adversaries, Israel and Hamas?
So I've had the opportunity to talk directly to the Qatari negotiators, and what one of them said to me is, "Look, we're not postmen here. We're not just taking messages from one group and passing it to the other. We're taking a proposal from one side, kind of editing it, looking at it to find a way that it would be acceptable to both sides, and then present it to the other side." And so it's that editing process in the middle to try to find some possible, space for agreement that Qatar has been doing. And it's all, they're able to do that because they know both sides. Now, we've had an agreement. We've had this first truce that the Qataris managed to negotiate back at the end of last month. We think that the Qataris are still in this process right now of trying to, have another agreement between these two parties, and we know that they are on the phone to both groups constantly.
Okay, Andrew, thanks so much for this.
You're welcome.
That's Reuters Qatar correspondent Andrew Mills in Doha. Ukraine's foreign ministry is condemning plans by Russia to potentially hold elections in occupied territories. Russia's Senate chairperson has announced residents in Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson will be able to vote in upcoming elections in March. The four regions were annexed by Russia during referendums last year, which are not recognized internationally. Ukraine says anyone sent to occupied areas to conduct or monitor elections will face criminal charges. This comes a day after Russian President Vladimir Putin announced he will run again, which would keep him in power until at least 2030. The COP28 Summit in Dubai is heading into its final days as nearly 200 countries try to hammer out a final statement. Today's theme is nature and land use and how they connect to climate issues. CBC's international climate correspondent Susan Ormiston is in Dubai, and as she tells us, there have also been protests held outside the meeting.
Shift the power. moment at COP28 in Dubai with several hundred activists singing and protesting against fossil fuels and for a ceasefire in Gaza.
Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now!
Tightly restricted where they could walk inside the UN venue and what signs they could display. The UAE routinely prohibits protests of any kind. The fight over oil and gas is heating up as the conference winds down to its last few days. A letter from OPEC to its member countries, including the UAE, urges them to strongly reject any agreement to phase out fossil fuels. That would have irreversible results, says OPEC.
It's very clear that OPEC is panicking right now about the prospect of an agreement at COP28 on the phase-out of all fossil fuels, and we've never been closer to an agreement here.
Roman Iuliani of Oil Change International says OPEC's intervention ratchets up the pressure.
We would just ask them, which side of history do you want to be on? Basically, do you want to oppose an agreement that we all know is necessary to meet our climate targets, or do you want to continue supporting the bottom line of the oil and gas industry?
Negotiators will have to find consensus among the 190 plus countries. Stephen Guilbeault, Canada's climate change minister, has been tasked to help the conference find some common ground. Beyond the oil beat, today's theme was nature.
There is only true powers that are in the rights of nature, that are in the natural laws.
COP28 agreed to more closely integrate decisions on how governments fight climate change and protect nature. In international negotiations, the two have been separate.
It's high time. I think it's long overdue, but very, very welcome that we have ministers pledging to work on both nature, biodiversity, and climate change.
Jennifer Tawali Corpus from the Philippines is a spokeswoman for the International Indigenous Peoples Forum.
It gives nature more power because, you know, sometimes climate solutions can be nature blind. For example, in my territory, reforestation efforts were undertaken as part of action on climate change, but they chose species that really were alien to the area and that were sucking up so much water.
Canada announced it will introduce a nature accountability bill next year to monitor progress on preserving nature. 1 year ago at Montreal's Biodiversity Conference, 200 countries agreed to protect 30% of the world's land, water, and oceans by 2030. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Dubai.
Germany is trying to breeze past the rest of the world in its green energy transition. It has set a target to meet 80% of its energy needs with renewables by 2030. One way of doing that is through wind power. But as Natalie Carney reports, German bureaucracy can make getting these projects up and running feel more like spitting in the wind.
On a hill in the middle of Germany's Black Forest is a clearing. It's not much to look at right now, but soon it will be home to a massive wind turbine, which will provide electricity to some 4,000 people annually.
The new one is like 160 meters and blades are like 60.
Thomas Schuwald is a managing partner at the Freiburg Green Energy Group. Despite them already operating over 100 publicly funded renewable energy projects across the country, they've had to wait 10 years to get this latest turbine contributing to the local power grid.
We started thinking about it back in 2015, 2016, but only had approval a year and a half ago. And now we have to wait another 2 years until the construction is finished.
Their biggest challenge, Schuwald says, bureaucracy. Germany is aiming to reach 115 gigawatts of added wind energy production by 2030, about the same capacity as 38 nuclear plants. But it is a long way off from that goal, says Leonhard Butschere, a climate and energy policy advisor at the Munich Environmental Institute.
That would be a doubling of the installed capacity. We are currently at 2.9 gigawatts, so that's about 2/3 of the goal has been installed. So that's how far off we are this year.
He agrees that lengthy and complex procedures, along with excessive state regulations, are getting in the way.
To install a new wind turbine in Germany, it takes on average 7.5 years. Lots and lots of regulation has been added or has been made more complicated. We have federal level, we have state level, we have regional level, we have a city level. And on each of these levels, there are obstructions to wind energy.
Tens of gigawatt hours of potential wind energy have been lost due to these delays, argue analysts. While a push is being made by the federal government to increase capacity, state governments, particularly in the south of Germany, are not as convinced.
It is felt as not fitting into the wonderful, lovely landscape. People are also skeptical whether there is enough wind in the south to actually make this worthwhile.
But winds of change are blowing through, says Butcher.
So many acceleration measures have been taken. These come mostly through EU law. For example, they define certain areas where wind energy can, by default, be built. And then another very important law specifies how much area has to be reserved for wind energy in the next years. And if the states do not define where these areas are, then any state legislation gets out of effect.
The German government has set a target of building 5 new wind turbines a day to reach its energy goals and has agreed to start importing wind hydrogen from Canadian wind farms starting in 2025. Yet the infrastructure to receive the hydrogen is lagging behind, with experts saying the project will likely be delayed by at least a year. Natalie Carney, CBC News, Munich.
Canadians are still facing long wait times for many surgeries, plus a backlog that built up during the pandemic. There's a lot of pressure to clear that, and many patients say something drastic needs to be done. One Toronto area hospital is trying to show change is possible. It's looking at ways to nearly triple the number of surgeries done in a day. Health reporter Christine Birak tells us how it works.
We started about 10 to 8. We've done 2 surgeries so far.
Dr. Sebastian Rodriguez is an orthopedic surgeon specializing in hips and knees. On this morning, he and a medical team at Toronto's Humber River Hospital want to show how more Canadians can safely get surgeries they need in hospitals. Dr. Rodriguez and his team have a goal: fix 14 hips in 8 hours.
If you listen to Canadians, be it physicians or patients over the last several years, everyone's saying the same thing. Like, we have to do better. We have to change what we're doing.
On a typical day, one hospital operating room is used by one surgeon to operate on 4 to 5 patients, and the room is cleaned between each patient. What they're trying at Humber is 14 surgeries, with Dr. Rodriguez alternating between 2 rooms and a cleaning crew moving back and forth between those rooms. The model is called hyper-throughput surgeries. They've done this at Humber River once before and managed 12 surgeries. That's the sound of a metal stem being inserted into the top of Richard White's thigh bone. How are you feeling?
Pretty good, actually.
The Humber team built White a new artificial joint in about 35 minutes.
That was really fast. When I woke up in the recovery and they told me what time it was, I was amazed.
We did so much planning.
Mylene Vidal is a highly trained operating room nurse. She says in order to increase the number of surgeries, they've made many small but significant changes.
The first thing that we actually did was like instrumentations. Just build a tray according to what they need.
A tray holds surgical tools and each one takes time to unwrap and prep. Smaller custom trays helped cut setup times here from 30 minutes per surgery down to about 11.
I'm about to go because I'm prepared for the next one.
By mid-afternoon, they're closing in on their goal.
We are on number 9, I believe.
Humber has also reduced the amount of time it takes bringing patients in and out of the operating room. Tech-wise, the surgeon's using IntelliJoint, a measuring tool that guides placement of the implant in real time.
The cumulative effect of all those minutes then allows us to add additional procedures in the day.
Jean-V Solanki is the VP of Clinical Services here at Humber River. She notes Ontario only pays hospitals to do a specific number of surgeries per year. Beyond their cap, Humber relies on fundraising dollars to do more surgeries.
We should be rewarding institutions that can actually optimize and innovate. We keep funding things like private clinics, and we keep sort of diverting the healthcare dollar.
She insists instituting hyper-throughput models in hospitals is the type of innovation provinces should be investing in.
One of our philosophies at Humber has been, if it can be done in a private clinic, why can't it be done here?
Around 4 p.m., Dr. Rodriguez and his team wrap up their 14th patient.
So, yeah, I mean, I feel good because, we're able to help 14 people today that are all going to go home.
While some argue hyper-throughput models are tough to replicate, others insist it is time for a cultural shift in hospitals, and change is possible. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.
You might have noticed stores popping up in Canadian cities selling psilocybin or magic mushrooms. The psychedelic drug is still illegal in this country. Its proponents want to change that and have long said that taking microdoses of it has mental health benefits. Now, a Canadian researcher is putting that to the test with a first-of-its-kind trial. Nick Purdon tells us about it.
Microdosing saved my life.
Andrina Stan says that at different times in her life, she struggled with her mental health.
In December 2020, I found myself in the middle of this living space, curled up in a ball. I was contemplating suicide. I'm not sure that I would still be here if it weren't for microdosing.
Stan says she tried different therapies, but nothing really worked until she found magic mushrooms.
What psychedelic do in microdoses is that it slowly brings that pain up so you can safely deal with it.
Stan says that microdosing psilocybin completely turned her life around. But what does the science say?
There's all these stories about how microdosing improves your mood and it'll save you from depression. And it's been great to actually go and check whether this is for real.
That's neuroscientist Rotem Petranker. Through the University of Toronto, he's doing the first ever clinical trial to see whether microdosing psilocybin helps with clinical depression. It's an 8-week trial with 20 participants who once a week get a small dose of either psilocybin or a placebo. And while Petranker doesn't have any concrete results yet, here's what he's observed so far.
We've had some people that came in with mild to moderate depression. By the end of the trial, they no longer meet criteria for major depressive disorder. So that's a very dramatic shift.
But Petranker says that people shouldn't get too excited just yet.
The dose we're using is so low that many people don't even know if they've taken psilocybin or placebo. And so because they don't know what they've taken, but they come in with a lot of expectations and hopes, it's possible that just because of those hopes, and they feel like they're doing something for themselves, already this affects their depression in very profound ways. And so this might be the placebo effect.
To know more definitively if microdosing helps with depression, Petranker says he needs to extend his trial and recruit more participants.
People are already microdosing in droves. It's extremely important to see whether microdosing is effective and also whether microdosing is safe.
Nick Purdon, CBC News, Toronto.
You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. After days of speculation, the Toronto Blue Jays have struck out in their bid to sign Shohei Ohtani, the Japanese baseball phenomenon opting instead to stay in Southern California. The Los Angeles Dodgers signed Ohtani in a historic deal. Philip Lee Shannock reports.
Toronto Blue Jays fans Tim Webster and his daughter Brooke drove from Pickering to Pearson Airport hoping to see Shohei Ohtani step onto Canadian soil.
We tracked the plane all day long and we made the trip, and my daughter and myself.
And I just saw on the phone that he's here in Canada.
But the rumors were untrue, and the chances the Jays could have landed Ohtani may have been overblown.
What you have to do is create suitors, real or imagined, so that teams essentially get into a bidding war.
Moisha Lander, who teaches sports economics at Concordia University in Montreal, thinks Toronto was always a long shot.
Flights leaving Anaheim headed for Toronto and things like that to try and build up this sort of excitement that maybe he's coming to Toronto.
And the tactic may have worked. Ohtani signed a record-breaking 10-year contract worth more than $950 million Canadian. Lander says Ohtani is also a creature of habit and may not have wanted to disrupt his life.
He very much likes to go back to Japan when he has the opportunity. And so being able to fly from LA is much, much easier than flying from Toronto.
But Shohei gets him anyway.
Julia Kreutz is a reporter with MLB.com. She says Ohtani is a once-in-a-generation talent. Ohtani is also both a hitter and a pitcher, although he recently suffered an injury.
Ohtani did undergo elbow surgery, and so he is not going to pitch next season, but we are obviously looking at a long-term record-breaking deal here that goes way beyond the 2024 season.
But Blue Jays fans, while crestfallen, aren't holding a grudge.
We love this guy, and so we want him to be happy.
Dave Pollard is co-founder of the Ohtani Canada fan club. He says he'll be rooting for both the Jays and the Dodgers come the spring.
You know, you can be both. You can love your home team, the Jays, and cheer for them, but you have to recognize the talent of Shohei Ohtani.
Philip Lishanok, CBC News, Toronto.
1970s heartthrob Ryan O'Neal has died at the age of 82. The Oscar-nominated actor got his start on soap operas before hitting a Hollywood jackpot, winning the role of Oliver Barrett IV in Love Story. Steve Futterman has more.
He burst upon the scene in the 1970s. Ryan O'Neal became one of Hollywood's biggest stars. He appeared in numerous hits, none more memorable than the tearjerker Love Story. O'Neal appeared alongside Ali MacGraw in the film's iconic scene.
Jenny, I'm sorry.
Don't. Love means never having to say you're sorry.
That performance earned O'Neal an Oscar nomination. There would be many other films, including the comedy Paper Moon. In that movie, he played a drifter during the Great Depression alongside his daughter, actress Tatum O'Neal, who at the time was just 9 years old.
I want my $200.
I don't have your $200 no more, and you know it.
As his career continued, there would be less starring roles. Most recently, O'Neal appeared in 24 episodes of the TV show Bones. Steve Futterman for CBC News, Los Angeles.
Rocking around the Christmas tree.
A Christmas classic that's currently the #1 song on the Billboard Hot 100. It's the first time Brenda Lee's hit Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree has taken the top spot, and it has had quite a road to get there. The song was written by Johnny Marks, who also wrote Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Brenda Lee was only 13 years old when she recorded it in 1958. It did pretty well over the years, until 1990, as Lee told Q's Tom Power.
It laid around a while, and all of a sudden, it was in the movie Home Alone, and then it just shot up the charts. The Christmas tree, have a happy holiday.
But never the very top. And anyway, Lee had other hits, like I'm Sorry.
So sorry that I was such a fool.
Around 2013, Billboard started allowing streams of songs to count towards the Hot 100. And all of a sudden, every December, Christmas hits from the past were dominating the charts of the present. One of them emerging as the clear fan favorite. Mariah Carey's 1994 song, All I Want for Christmas Is You, hit #1 in 2019 and has claimed that spot around Christmas time every year since. This year, Brenda Lee's team must have sensed Mariah's grip on the tinsel throne was starting to slip. On the 65th anniversary of Rockin', a new music video came out, and Brenda Lee started popping up on TV and on TikTok.
Hello, Brenda Naders. Grandmother is here.
Until, finally, victory was hers. In hitting the peak, Lee's also smashed records. It's the longest amount of time a single has taken to become #1. It's the longest break in time between an artist's #1s. And at 78 years old, Lee is also the oldest recording artist to top the chart. She reacted with tears when Billboard told her the news.
Wow. All these years, Mr. Marks will be proud.
And maybe the biggest compliment has come from her fellow Christmas queen. Mariah Carey sent Brenda Lee flowers and happy holiday wishes. Of course, we'll leave you with more of Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree on The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skendaris. Thanks for listening.
Have a happy holiday.